No, actually, thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure. It's fun. When I knew that I'm coming to talk about IIT, I was both excited and somewhat unsure because I actually don't know a lot about IIT myself. Not like these guys who've been working on this for years. But I like debates. I thought debates are really fun, especially when they get heated. But I think we must learn also not to take it personally. In that case, we will learn a lot of stuff. But today, having really understood a bit more about the purpose of the meeting, I decided to try to be a bit more constructive than usual. So what I would do in the next 20 minutes or so might sound a bit like more unsolicited advice rather than direct criticisms. And so I hope that it would be more constructive. Of course, then it runs the danger of sounding patronizing, like I'm like a wise old guy telling you what to do. But I hope to convince you there is a certain sense that I might have some unusual experience I can share. First of all, I grew up in this field. Like really, I spent my whole adult life here. Probably it's true for Ryota, and now we really saw a lot of changes in the past 16 years or so since I'm in this field. But that's common among some of us. But I think there's one more thing that I think is even more unusual. Of course, there are many researchers in the U.S. who work on the problem of consciousness. But I think it's fair to say I'm one of the very few people who really did nothing but consciousness explicitly as my primary academic interest. And while doing that, having to gone through the relatively conservative Ivy League tenure system from ground up. So in case you guys don't know, getting tenure in the US is an actual process that in my home school, in my previous university, Columbia University, we fire about half of them. So people come in as assistant professor, and we get rid of them get rid of a good number of them in a few years. And I wasn't even trained in that system. So my doctoral and postdoctoral advisor, Dick Passingham, was a really great guidance mentor in many ways. But he's neither in the same country nor in the same field. So I had to really learn how to do this thing. Frankly, it was pretty frightening and frustrating at times. And so to give an example, many of my colleagues then told me, if you want to study consciousness, basically you have to prepare to find a different job in a few years. We will fire you. Unless you really compete and succeed in funding, but not just funding. Even getting on funding is not good enough. You have to succeed in the most conservative funding mechanism, namely what we call NIH and NSF grants. And the reason is because you need to demonstrate to all the other people that doing what you do, something so dubious as consciousness, is actually legitimate, perceived to be legitimate by the mainstream. I mean, because the default answer is no, it's definitely not legitimate. You have to do something extra to prove that. So having gone through that process, I think I like to think I learned a few things about how to convince our sternest critics that what we do is actually not just nonsense. Because a lot of them actually from the outset would think that what we do is basically a waste of time. So having put myself into their shoes, I think I learned something. And I often get the kind of very critical comments that maybe among ourselves we don't hear, right? Because in academia, things are peer-reviewed, so we get feedback from our own immediate peers. But sometimes if you really cross the aisle and go to the other disciplines, you really learn what they really think of us. So that's like one quote that I got the permission to quote here. Actually, it started when I posted something on IIT on Facebook. And then this senior colleague of mine, I mean not necessarily the same institution, but just a colleague I know who's a theoretical neuroscientist, wrote the following. So I said, I haven't paid close attention, but my impression of all the theories of consciousness is that they are made up of thin air. Just here I describe some complicated stuff, and then you blah, there's some magic claim. And I thought Scott Aronson's takedown of IIT was devastating. He put it in bracket. That wasn't even the main reason. The main reason was, this is the general impression I got. Am I missing something? Then I thought, yeah, you are missing something. I think we are a bit better than that. So I replied, but he didn't even click like on my comment. It's just that they just left it at that. And this is not a, and he's a very influential person in the field, actually. I did not call his name here, but I think it's fair to say this is not a singular thing. Many people in the field does not really take us very seriously. So there is a sense almost that you, in order to be taken seriously as a junior person, you have to distance yourself from certain kind of work, which is really unfortunate. And I think it's fair to say IIT has made certainly a lot of impact. So I see a lot of good work, new work being done. Certainly, it attracted the kind of people. But I think it's fair to say that it mostly attracted the people with a more mathematical or theoretical background, because IIT, amongst the other consciousness theory, is one of the more mathematically precise ones. But I want to say that the person I just quoted about, that I didn't tell you who that is, he actually was a physicist by training. And in fact, even among the physics or computational scientists I talked to, not all of them are so hot about IIT. And then some of them would actually, one word that came up a lot in this kind of discussion is that they liken the whole IIT phenomenon as a religion. They think that this is like not really scientific. I must qualify, this is not my view. I do not think that at all. If you actually go back to the, and I don't just say this lightly, back in 2011, when David Rosenthal and I reviewed the literature, we wrote a text article on theories of consciousness, we actually included IIT. I thought IIT was very interesting. I thought IIT was intuitively interesting and triggering. There's some ideas to it that has to be almost true. So I think that in that sense, the last few years I really see is that there seems to be almost like a change in the trend, that the reception of IIT, to my mind, has gotten much worse in the past few years since we reviewed it last. And meanwhile, I was also acknowledged that the work done by Oizumi-san is actually good. I think the IIT has actually, the theory itself actually has become refined, but the reception in the field has become much worse. I've heard a lot of hostile things really being said about that.
So what does it mean by it's like religion, by, according to those people?
I can only interpret. I think what they meant was there is a lot of leap of faith involved. So I'll explain a little bit here, actually. As I said, this is not my view. I don't think it's true, but I can, maybe over dinner, I can tell you at least 3 very well-known scientists have told me using the same word to describe IIT. In fact, there are probably more. So I like to see that I'm not coming here to destroy the theory. Instead, I would see this is a publicity problem that I see, and I have kind of gone through the same thing, going through the same conservative funding system. People also thought my work was sloppy and just bad. And I think instead of getting upset about this is so unfair, which I think sometimes is unfair, because a lot of those people, like let's say the last quote, the person opened by saying, I haven't been paying attention, but I think this is so bad. Well, if you didn't pay attention, maybe you missed some details, right? So I'm not on those people's side necessarily, but I think on the other hand, it's not useful for us to be pound on tables and get upset. Instead, we should think about what went wrong. So I think one thing that is really helpful to think about is if you are in the science of consciousness, and this is a really good occasion to think about this, right? Because we would like to do this in a really fundamental interdisciplinary approach, including physicists, mathematicians. This is a great exercise. But ultimately, the hurdle to break into is really the standard mainstream biomedical sciences, right? This is how our funding would most likely go to. And in any case, they've been studying consciousness for such a long time, so if you don't get their respect and approval, just unilaterally making a new field within physics is not exactly going to work. And then once you think about that, of course, in biomedical sciences, then the strength of IIT doesn't really come out so strong, because in biomedical sciences, unlike in physics, unlike in computer science, precise quantitative formulation is often unimportant. There's a well-known saying that you want your model to be as detailed as your data, but not more. Right? The data is actually pretty coarse-grained at this point. So having a theory that is mathematically precise is not a bad thing, but it's also not going to get you a lot of mileage. And in general, biomedical sciences, needs to be very empirically driven, and that's why those conservative funding mechanisms in the US mainstream where I work require a lot of pilot data and demonstration from multiple labs. It tends to be conservative. And you might think, oh, conservative is bad because conservative means that you don't get new ideas. Yes and no. If you're conservative, you're less likely to get new ideas, but you also have you have a good outcome, which is that you avoid the danger of getting these like wrong ideas. Because in biomedical science, many ideas are very clever, very intriguing, very well formulated, turn out to be just flat wrong. And often it costs us a lot of money and time to find out, and careers were ruined, and young people need jobs, etc. So the cost to be paid for not being conservative is pretty high. So this is a picture of a man who's probably the best example for this sort of thing. How many of you recognize who that is? Let me guess. Yeah. So this is Sigmund Freud, right? I think it's fair to say, some of you don't even know who that is, because in psychology, in neuroscience, we don't talk about Freud anymore. We think we're over that. I think it's fair to say, though, without this person, we won't be here today, right? The modern science of consciousness research is really irrevocably colored by the downfall of the Freudian empire. And to my mind, that criticism from Karl Popper that Freud was unfalsifiable was really so devastating that it outlasted even Karl Popper's own legacy. So within philosophy of science, people are not so hot about Karl Popper anymore, but that criticism really stayed. The idea was that Freud was such an eloquent writer, he's a great writer, very appealing, very interesting, and really galvanized the whole field and created this whole industry of psychoanalysis. But it turns out that the whole field seems to be very resistant to empirical challenges. And that really gave psychology such a bad name. According to Hans Einzig, it set the field backward for half a century. So that is a kind of, I think, historical burden. I don't think I'm not saying that IIT is anything like Freud. This is not my point. My point is, but we are in this together. All of us in consciousness science, we have to be aware that we are bearing this historical burden. Amongst ourselves, we think we are over that, but our critics don't necessarily think so. They're always going to think, well, sounds like another Freudian revival. They're always going to be skeptical of us that way. And so that's a bit of history. In terms of the current psychics, I think there's also a bit of danger. After this, I'll go into more details, but I'll give you a bit of background where I come from. In psychology and neuroscience in general, I think there's also a very prominent change in trends in the past few years, which is everybody's calling for science to be more open. It needs to be more replicable. There's a replication crisis that we are very concerned with here. We want data to be shared by many. We want to replace the old model of authoritative opinions by the field and replace it by data shared by many. So in that sense, one of the greatest strengths to me about IIT actually has to be understood in this context. So as some of you know, Giulio Tononi is the originator of the theory, worked with Gerald Edelman, the Nobel Prize winner, and another major proponent of the theory, Christoph Koch, also famously worked with Francis Crick, the Nobel Prize winner who helped to discover the DNA structure. So these are giant figures in the field, in science in general. Within the field, again, we look up to these people. I haven't met their mentors, but to my mind, Christoph and Giulio have been mentors and friends, and I owe them debts personally and intellectually and otherwise. These are people we look up to. And within the field, we understand that even we look up to them, we respectfully disagree, and it's all very healthy. But I think given the general context, the zeitgeist of going against, authority, opinions by a few white male, trying to get science to be more egalitarian, more inclusive, more open, I think this sometimes backfires. So this is a picture of Christoph having a conversation with Dalai Lama, and you can find a quote correspondingly in the New York Times from Christoph saying that IIT is the only promising fundamental theory of consciousness, and others saying would echo and agree. This is a leading theory. This is an established theory. I don't personally think this is true at all. And if Christoph is here, I will tell him, and I think we'll have a debate like this. So within the field, this is all very good. But as it's perceived, as it come out in kind of prominent places like New York Times, then it becomes a bit of a problem because other people are going to think this is really this reflects the consensus of the field, and this reflects the state of the art. This reflects the cutting edge. And once you do that, then you have, three consequences. One is the theory does gain some attention. That's a good thing. But you have two potential problems. One is you offend all the other people who have been working on consciousness for the past 2 decades, who are not fans of IIT, and now you say this is the only promising theory, as if the other stuff is really nothing. That's a small problem within the field. It creates some conflict. But I think the bigger problem is once you make such a promising or a high expectation, you really set yourself up a very high bar. Because your critics are going to think, well, this is the only promising theory, like this is the leading established theory, then it has to be good. It has to be very good indeed. If you don't have the empirical goods to back up, then perhaps it would hurt the credibility of the field as a whole. I don't think it really is the case, but I like to think we need to have some ways to really guard against this kind of danger, because it could be a pretty big problem. So this is probably the only substantive and positive proposal I'm going to make today. I think there's been a lot of talks about IIT being empirically supported, and I think sometimes the focus on the mathematical details takes away the attention to the empirical importance. And so far, basically what I said is, for works on consciousness, it's very good to be provocative and imaginative in ideas, but ultimately you need to pass these empirical hurdles. And sometimes focusing too much on the math is not nearly as good as focusing on the empirical side. And when it comes to the empirical side, I think it would help a lot if we distinguish between 3 kinds of predictions. So the first kind is not really prediction. It's really hindsight. So some people would say, IIT predicts that destroying the cerebellum would not impair consciousness. So that really means it provides a hindsight explanation for a known fact, because everybody already knows about that. It's not really a prediction, nobody can test it, and people already know. So you can also make another kind of prediction, which is novel but uncontested. So you can say, well, we predict that this is a kind of structure in the brain that with this kind of particular dynamics and with this kind of particular calculation of phi, then consciousness will be correlated. Of course, other people have not made those predictions because they don't even have the concept of phi and complexity in their theories. But they are not going to be contesting about those predictions either. They're going to think whichever way it goes is fine, because we are not even concerned with that, right? Just as if you have a functionalist, a computational theory of consciousness, you're basically agnostic about whether neurons have sort of chemical basis. But it doesn't mean that you're against that prediction, you're just silent about that. So it really is the third kind of prediction that I think is most important. If you talk to philosophers of science, and that's a fairly straightforward point, you really want to make novel predictions that are also contested by some major opponents, right? So you want to make a prediction that is not just your opponents don't care, your opponents are kind of obligated to object to that, because according to the theory, they will predict exactly the opposite. And now your theory predicts the opposite to what they predict, and now you can go and test it. And that is, in a way, a very useful way to really challenge a theory. And I think, as Chichia-san also mentioned, this is kind of like where the field is going to already. And I think, given the fact that the promise of IIT has been so big, and that in our field there is so little data and so many theories, it's not unfair to say the third kind of prediction, it should be an entry requirement for any new theory. If you want to say you have a new theory, it's no good to say, well, I have some new hindsight explanation for some other stuff. You really want to make sure that your theory makes novel and contested predictions. And just as a side note, this is not too high a bar at all, because other existing theory already make this kind of novel and contested predictions. So I'm particularly talking about global workspace theory and local recurrency theory, championed by Stan Dean and Victor Lama. As a kind of disclaimer, I'm not a fan of either of these theories. In fact, I think both of them are just as bad as IIT, if it helps. But I think, to be fair to them, they have really made a lot of empirical investment into the field and excited a lot of people from not just their own camp. They have actually influenced other people from outside of the lab, quite often sometimes very prominent researchers. So like Marvin Chung is at Yale on this side, Ken Akiyama at Harvard, Michael Cohen at Harvard, Patrick Carfana. These are like some of the most influential vision scientists of our time. Then Dennett, the philosopher. Victor Lama, on the other hand, have his own camp of people too. So they disagree on issues that are very clear. So global workspace says the prefrontal cortex is necessary for consciousness. Local recurrency says no. So if this issue alone is resolved one way or the other, we know one theory will be right, the other will be wrong. They also, global workspace theory says that phenomenology is sparse, meaning that you really only see a few things at the same time. The rest is kind of like an illusion. The local recurrency guy says no, you consciously experience a lot of details. Global workspace theory says attention is crucial, an issue that actually first brought up by Chichia-san in an influential text paper distinguishing consciousness and attention. And the local recurrency guy says no, you can completely distinguish them and dissociate them. And global workspace theory also says consciousness will be important for high-level cognition, like task switching. And local recurrency theory would say it is not. I hope I didn't say something to offend. This is not too offensive. So these are the kind of things that you wanted to, in a healthy field of debate, where two sides of different camps would make predictions that are, if it turns out one way or the other, you know that which theory wins. I mean, it doesn't mean that these theories will be resolved in one day, right? And probably there will be other theories and contested, but at least we have a scoreboard here. We can keep honest tally about who's right and who's wrong in the long run. Whereas come to IIT, I worry that sometimes the proponents of IIT tend to be less inclined to be engaged in this kind of activity. So for instance, I asked so in preparing this talk, I asked a number of people who are working on IIT. I asked this question: if IIT seems to be your favorite theory, you've been working on it, can you tell me what's your second favorite theory of consciousness? And quite often I get a blank answer. Sometimes I haven't even thought about that. And I think that's not very good. You really want to, opportunity cost, right? You make your prediction, you make your choices by thinking what is your second favorite option, and you also want to justify, well, my second favorite theory maybe is global workspace theory, and you also need to be able to give a very quick reason why that is second favorite. You say, well, because it makes this prediction, and I think that prediction is in favor of IIT over a global workspace. And that's what we really want. So in the remaining time, I would mention in this exercise, and give some example, how do we keep honest tally? And I think we really need to focus on the empirical details rather than the mathematical ones. As you've seen, like IIT gone through some versions, so attacking the little details, I think is maybe distracting, because if this version turned out to be wrong, IIT is not going to change. I mean, it's just going to create a new version that bypassed this little problem. So these are things that I think the guys who are working on IIT needs to work on. But for us to look at a global picture, I think the empirical data might be even more important. So this is one paper from Stephen Lawry's group that gives you the impression that it supports IIT. If you read the abstract, it would say it kind of supports integration as important. But if you read the empirical details, often it doesn't really support it. So here is being shown is a healthy control, and then in minimal conscious state and vegetative state, minimal conscious and vegetative state, they both have a reduction in this nodular measure, that is how integrated information is in the brain. So if anything, first of all, it shows that it's less integrated in these unconscious states. You might think, oh, this is not a straightforward measure. That's all very well, but the other thing is minimally conscious and vegetative state are at similar level. So that's also not so good, but I think the major problem is really in the text I said here. If you look at the other measures they've gone through, they found no difference between all these cases in characteristic path length or in global efficiency of information transfers, whereas these measures have previously been taken as supporting evidence for IIT, namely that in anesthesia, these measures are supposed to go down, and then in that case, they were taken to support IIT. But here you compare conscious versus unconscious states, they don't really differ. And I think these kind of problems cannot be brushed aside. You mean IIT guys need to really tackle it head on. I mean, I think many people, I would suggest that we focus more on these kind of cases than the mathematical details. So I'm running a bit overrun, but I'll go through this quickly. So the other case is actually from Tononi's group themselves. So this is a PNAS paper that came out last year, and they show that using this kind of complexity measures, when you look at people in fMRI doing driving and listening to the radio, in fact, your brain looks like that there are two complexes, as in like a split brain situation, as you can say in the title. But that has been published by this same group without much mention of how it might be a problem for the theory. To my mind, it's a bit of a problem because when I drive and listen to the radio, I kind of do it every day when I live in Los Angeles. I don't feel that I've become a split brain patient, right? I still have one unified conscious experience. So to the extent that these measures are supposed to support IIT, I'm not sure how it works. And a third case, since we're talking about split brain, we also know that recently there's a paper from Yale Pinto's group, Victor Lama's group, that showed that actually the case of split brain may be not as clear as we thought. So split brain always depends on a few patients, and it's very difficult for you to access because people really don't do this whole corpus callosum lesion anymore. It used to be the treatment for epilepsy, but now we have better treatment. So these kind of patients are very rare. But if you look at them, you find cases where clearly they don't have split consciousness. The corpus callosum is completely cut. And of course, there are other subcortical brain structures that connect to two hemispheres. So you might think, oh, so they're still connected. But according to IIT, those connections are exactly what you think is not part of the core complex. So according to previous analysis, you need the kind of cortical, very complex, dense connection. So the core of the complex is traditionally thought not to include the subcortical areas. That was actually taken as the reason why lesioning cerebellum and basal ganglia does not hurt consciousness, because consciousness is mostly in the cortex. It's not clear where yet, but at least in the cortex. But now you cut corpus callosum, and you have cases where consciousness is not divided. So finally, one more example. Again, not this time it's not from Tononi's group, but also from a camp that is kind of in support of IIT, and this is from Satohiro Tajima-san's paper, which won the William James Prize for SSC last year. That's good. In the study, they also used some novel mathematical ways to estimate measures, similar to IIT-ish complexity measures. And you can argue it's not exact, but I can also argue none of these are exact so far in the literature. So to the extent that some inexact measures are taken as evidence, we have to take these as evidence too. So, and again, on the face of it, if you read the abstract or if you go to Tajima-san's talk, it would sound like that it's in support of the theory. But if you read the details, what they found is that when you're being anesthetized, your brain complexity measures really go down, and when you're awake, your measures are very high. But then they also compare when you're awake, when your eyes are open or eyes are closed, and they found no difference. So you can argue that when your eyes are open or closed, you're just as conscious. But if you're in an experiment, being in an eye-closed state when you're not moving around, not doing much, it's unclear whether you're perceptually enjoying nearly as much qualia, right? Because there's not much going on. When your eyes are open, your eyes probably look around, your visual experience is probably one dominant component of your consciousness. So that, according to some people, like philosopher Ned Block, is taken to suggest that this means that IIT is really just a theory of cognition. Because when your eyes close, of course, you still think about stuff. And that's some aspect of consciousness, but it's not the kind of qualia, hard problem, perceptual experience that we've been talking about.
What is the difference between theory of cognition and theory of consciousness?
Yeah, so I think that so this is a good occasion to bring up this definition. So we've been talking about consciousness as this subjective experience, right? Having subjective, qualitative, phenomenological experience, what it is like. And IIT in particular is always talk about, we start with phenomenology. This is what we are really after. So some other people would just say, oh, consciousness is just about being able to walk around and interact with the world. But IIT is decidedly not that kind of theory. So if it turns out to be just about cognition, being able to think about when to have lunch next and stuff, that would not be so good for the theory.
So it doesn't matter whether you're conscious or unconscious, you mean?
Yeah, so it's not talking about the everyday notion of conscious as in being awake and being able to respond. It's really about the subjective phenomenological experience. That's what the theory is supposed to be about. But the data doesn't always work so well. I'm not going to say any of this is really damning cases. I mean, I can already see that your minds are clicking and thinking how to respond to me. I'm just going to see that there seems to be some source of tension, and it would not be so good to try to brush it aside, especially given our historical burden. I mean, it's really to convince the rest of the field that we are not doing the same thing about brushing empirical challenges aside, however plausible our ideas. So let me end with this one point, which is, we often said the theory is empirically still infancy or still developing, but we should pay attention to theory because it has conceptual appeal. In fact, because it is supposed to be the only theory that comes from phenomenology, and this has always been kind of touted as one of the selling points. But again, about this, I'm also not very sure that it actually goes very far. If we only talk about ourselves among IIT aficionados, of course it's very easy to get ourselves to agree. This is like an echo chamber. But if you talk outside of the field, in fact, this is Scott Aronson challenging, how come you have these sets of logic gates that will be conscious? Or just like the other question someone asked, so you're going to say I can write a little computer program that will be conscious. And to some of these people at least, IIT is not very conceptually appealing because of these weird cases of having to say something so simple might be conscious. I think overall it's true that in philosophy, IIT has not made much of an impact as far as I can see. I mean, there are occasional philosophers who side with IIT because they kind of like it anyway. But I think on the whole, the field has not really subscribed to the theory or been very impressed with the theory. This is not to say IIT is bad. Of course, we've all been there. In consciousness, we all used to this feeling of working against the grain. All of us have. My whole career, always I've been told this is complete rubbish and don't do it. So I have no illusion that I will convince you to stop working at IIT. But I think you should not stop working at IIT. But my take-home point is just this. This is a quote from Thomas Kuhn, who mentioned about how do we do science. I think in science we should look for changes of paradigms. We should look for exciting opportunities. But as in political revolutions, so in paradigm choice in science, there is no higher standard than the assent of the relevant community. It's a peer review system, right? So this issue of paradigm choice can never be unequivocally settled by logic and experiment alone. Ultimately, it's about winning over your peers. And in that sense, I think IIT would still have some more work to do. Thank you.
Comments or questions from the floor?
Perfectly convinced.
Or Masabi, do you want to say something first? As a reply?
I'll discuss in the debate session.
So this is already a debate session. Yes.
So let's just clarify what Hakon's trying to say. So you have lots of comments about socio-political aspects of theory and the field and community and stuff, and this last citation is really pointing to that, and I guess we appreciate, and I do share quite a bit of criticism against IIT, but in your talk there aren't much said about what's wrong purely scientifically about IIT, and you cited several papers, and one point I got, and most of the audience got, is that there are several cases where empirical findings are not consistent with the prediction. So is that the only point you want to make?
No, I think it's not the only point I want to make. The point in a nutshell is because of the way consciousness research needs to be, we actually need to be extra careful about being empirical. And if these cases don't convince you that it's wrong, then I worry that the theory would give the impression of being unfalsifiable. Then it's worse than wrong. Yeah. So none of these cases, that's why I don't focus so much on these cases. I don't want to go into the details because IIT might tomorrow have 4.0 that does not have this problem. But my point is, if at this point we cannot even, no evidence can possibly falsify it, then it sounds a bit like Freud.
Actually, now I just wanted to make a comment.
Now on Hakon's side, once upon a time I remember somebody famous in neural net, again I don't want to name him, was at the Brown University, and somebody provided a huge empirical evidence, neuroscience, psychophysics, about, I forgot what it was, something, perception of attention. And this guy stood up, wrote an equation, neural net PDP theory, and said, look, my prediction is exactly your results. And this is hindsight, basically, in your category. And then the presenter, the scientist, said, I'm sorry, my memory was wrong. Actually, my empirical finding was opposite. And then this neuronet guy said, no problem, my theory is so powerful. So you just reverse this negative sign to positive, and my prediction is exactly what you did. I predicted this. So is IIT something like that? So this is slightly on his side now. Oizumi-san.
I think IIT is not like that. I don't change the sign or something. Yeah, but again, this is the ideal test for IIT. For instance, that the neural recording is not perfect. For example, that you mentioned Tajima's study, and he uses, for instance, ECOG, and that's a limited recording of the just from the populations of neurons. And I think that they just use some raw signal, and we don't know that from the viewpoint of IIT that there should be some optimal scale, some relevant scale for consciousness in terms of space and time. And ideally, we want to search first that kind of scale. In this case, they just use raw signal recording from the ECOG channels, and this might not correspond to the for instance, the levels of consciousness itself. So yeah.
So it probably would be helpful for you guys to more go out of your way to directly address this, rather than wait for people to bring this up. And the other thing is, one thing that's useful from David Marr, if you remember the old David Marr, in his book there was, in the end, there were predictions that he called like 3-star predictions. Those are predictions that once wrong, my whole theory is dead. He would be very generous in giving those away.
Yeah.
And I think something in IIT needs to be done too. So you might say, okay, none of these are critical, but then to the extent these are not critical, then all these supports are of the similar nature. They are approximation, but somehow we need to come up with some predictions that are really
I totally agree.
completely would falsify the theory. Just
So I have both support for you and comment against your point. So, but I agree that currently the empirical support for IIT is very weak, but I think there are many practical limitations. So one is the limitation in recording, which Oizumi-san just mentioned, and also computationally it's very hard. So we can't compute phi and complex in realistic systems. So these are known difficulties in IIT. But in addition to these computational and recording limitations, the third limitation is we are very limited in phenomenological data. So if we want to test predictions of IIT, we can only go for the comparison between anesthetized state versus awake, or something like that, only very crude differences. But I think because we feel we are so familiar with our own phenomenology, we don't have enough psychological or psychophysical methods to characterize our own experiences. So that really reduces our ability to actually make specific predictions about the contents of consciousness. So but I think for the first two, I think we are all working on that. I think neuroscientists are developing more and more sophisticated recording methods, and Oizumi-san is developing a new, faster computational algorithms. But I don't know many people working on this characterization of phenomenology. And also when we discuss axioms of IIT, we often feel uncertain whether they are sufficient or if they are phenomenologically trivial. So I think some philosophers and psychologists should do more work on there. And okay, so that was my support for your criticism against IIT. But I also try to be constructive. And you mentioned, Christoph says IIT is the only promising theory. I take your point that it's a little bit unfair to say that, especially for people working on consciousness from different perspectives. But on the other hand, I feel sometimes I feel IIT may be the only theory in some sense. So for example, like you mentioned, like global workspace and digital ionosphere, but those are more brain process hypotheses about consciousness. But those theories do not really explain why particular part of the brain is conscious. Ultimately, it has to be determined in terms of causal relationships in the brain, and then if we want to build that kind of theory, we should look into causality of information rather than location in the brain. So in that sense, I think we need to have somewhat more information theoretic theory beyond like brain region-based hypothesis.
I think, as Ryoda mentioned, that the weakness of global work theory is it lacks mathematics, I think. And we cannot actually compare their prediction with the prediction of IIT because of the lack of mathematical equations. If they give us some equations, or if they give us the mathematical definition for instance, the broadcasting information or some ignition ones, these important concepts are just described in words, and these are not described in mathematical equations. If global work theory gives us such equations, we just can compare and we can constructively discuss which is favorable for experiments.
Maybe I can quickly reply to you. So I'm with you guys. I mean, that's why I'm here. And as I said, in 2011, I actually reviewed and included IIT as one of the major theories in our text paper. And so there's a lot I'm actually sympathetic about. But I must say, my job today is to channel what the critics I've heard would say. They're not going to really care about that, because they would say, in biomedical science, mathematical formulation is not really that important, because many successful theories of how our biomedical, our body works didn't start with specific, very quantitative hypotheses. They are qualitative. They are actually sometimes very qualitative, but it just turned out to be right. And as you get more data, then you start to model the data. You don't model thin air. This is a difference between physics and biomedical sciences. And why we let physicists do this starting from math is that they have a good history of succeeding, right? So we know that I do believe that physicists are right, because quantum mechanics give me CD players, and rockets fly, we put men on the moon, so okay, we let them get away with that. But in biomedical science in general, people are not going to be very easily happy with those axioms. In particular, those axioms of phenomenology, that we know that is a difficult thing to get right. There are people called phenomenologists who spend their lifetime arguing what exactly is the phenomenology. So against all of this, my point is just that we would really do well to focus on the empirical data. I like the mathematical appeal. I find it very elegant and very, very interesting. And also, I like this kind of thing. But most of our critics really don't care. They would think that, nobody told you to go this route to start with math. Of course, it's difficult for you to test it. And I know these limitations makes it very difficult for you. But maybe you just shouldn't start that way. Maybe starting the way with neuroscience like everybody else is the right way. So
okay, maybe I want to also kind of,
Maybe one of the things is that when you start from math, usually you do it because it gives you a certain kind of ability to prove things that follow forward from what you started with. And I think, let's say we just cut out neuroscience completely, there would still be a reason to care about consciousness and things like computer science and so on, assuming that you actually had this forward ability. I think the problem is that IIT starts from math, but then there isn't that much about what IIT then lets you guarantee about downstream processes. So the thing about the cell phone, for example, the problem isn't that, oh, my cell phone is conscious, I can't deal with that. The problem is, I know I can put a big matrix multiplication into my cell phone in the kind of constructive style that Scott Aronson used in his blog, and then, so what? It's not that, yes, now it has a high five, what does that mean, or what does that let my cell phone do that it couldn't do before? if the mathematical basis of IIT is the strength of IIT, then I think it also needs to have that kind of extra implication that can be used in a constructive way. And if it had that, then it would lessen the need for the empirical validation, because then you would build a CD player out of IIT and it would work and do what it needed to do, and you could just say, well, humans are different or not, who cares? I have my CD player. But that's also something that needs to be added.
Before that, I want to also ask sort of because of this opportunity, want to ask whether the Hackman's view on sort of difficulty of the consciousness research within sort of the neuroscience of psychology, is it sort of the peculiar kind of things that we are only kind of perceived subjectively, or is it also true for other fields of the science? Like I think my guess is that within physics, if you work with the quantum information, you might actually encounter in the same kind of situation. If you go that, then you may not get tenure. Or if you go into, I don't know, astronomy, if you start, looking at the information theory of the black hole, then you go, nuts or whatever, many kind of things are, always there within each field. So I'm not really worried about the funding body or, sociology of the science with respect to the consciousness. Especially after talking to the people really interdisciplinary. So my kind of the view is kind of I don't care about that issue, but I don't know if you have any kind of the third person point of view, whether this kind of struggle we are having is not really a real issue, or you think that's also quite an important issue. I don't know. Does anybody have any opinion? Maybe Mike?
May I say something?
Yeah?
So it's kind of like my last point. I used to not care either, right? We all started in this field going against the grain. Is the romantic feelings that keep us going. We always know that other people are against us, and I used to not care. I started caring for two reasons. One is I read Thomas Kuhn, so that helped a little bit in understanding how things work. And the other thing I started caring is I started having my students start looking for jobs. And then I realized that let's not kid ourselves. None of us here is going to solve consciousness within our lifetime, probably. In science, things take generations to be done. And if we are not really sustaining this community as a legitimate and respectable one, I do worry that it's not going to go very well. So I do think these things matter.
Yeah, but my point is that the same kind of difficult question, difficult field also exists in other fields. And these fields are fine as they are. None of the people who are working on quantum information believe that they can make the quantum computers within our lifetime, right?
So I think that's right. When you do revolution, you are taking a big risk, right? And I think if you take a big risk, it's a big risk, big reward kind of thing.
Right.
And it can be okay. I think working on quantum these days in physics is totally fine. If you're a string theorist in a conservative place, that might not be so fine. So there's a matter of degree. And another field that I happen to know a little bit is sociology. So since the days of Karl Marx, nobody's willing to make empirical predictions anymore, because the last time they did, it messed up so bad. Mm-hmm. And so I think in psychology and neuroscience, we are kind of in between, because Freud was only a few decades ago. So I think we should be a little bit more conservative given our track record. If we had built rockets that flew and put men on the moon recently, I think we could use a bit more optimism and daring attitude. But neuroscience really didn't have that kind of track record to back up our ability to indulge. That's what I worry about.
Yeah, so several minutes ago you guys are talking about the axiom, questions of axioms. So I have to repeat my criticism that I raised actually once to Ryota in a conference. The axiom number one said, consciousness is informative, and I want to know why. Okay? And axiom number two is saying consciousness is integrated. I want to know why. I agree that my consciousness experience is more or less appearing that way, phenomenologically, but I want to know why. Number three, exclusions, very unique and one. I want to know why it's phenomenologically appearing to us that way. And the entire thing about consciousness science to me is to try to provide some account for those unique characteristics from, I don't know, neural dynamics or neural network features or whatever it is, post-prediction, prediction, whatever. Now, putting them in axioms is by definition giving up explanation. And this is, formalistic mathematics theory says, well, put axiom and then you just prove theorems, but not axioms itself. And you can put several, like Euclid versus non-Euclid, you can provide different sets of axioms and start entire business again. So to my best, I can interpret IIT as a nice proposal to give quantitative description of consciousness. And there's always this frustration of the examples where IIT claims we predicted this and then the empirical evidence supported it or consistent. To my best, it is just the sanity check of this methodology to see if it's consistent with the current knowledge of neuroscience or intuition. So for example, split brain, slightly lower phi, sleeping, maybe lower phi. Well, that's great because it's nicely confirmatory to our consciousness. So it is nice methodology, but that's why there's this frustration that, okay, we are waiting, Hakwan and I are at least waiting for very unique counterintuitive and quantitative prediction from IIT, and that turned out to be proved, and not in a hindsight sense, but in a real prediction sense by empirical evidence. So there's a frustration. So I'm proposing in a way as a criticism to IIT, but also I want to know, Oizumi-san is agree that this is a proposal for a nice quantitative descriptive method.
I think that the critical test, for instance, that for IIT is that split brain. Because of we have never done some quantification or how much information is integrated in the split brain patients. We never, like in the study Hakuan mentioned, they just did some psychological experiments, and they have never seen the brain activity itself. So if we calculate some integrated information with the IIT method, and then if IIT predicts, for instance, that this is really split or this is unified, and this prediction is against actually the psychophysics experiment, that I think that's some critical evidence for IIT. And that kind of thing has never been done. And I think that this kind of, the complex is kind of most unique proposal in IIT. Because integration, I think that many people believe that the integration is kind of key of consciousness. But so far that no theory does not say about where the consciousness arises, how the boundary is consciousness determined. For instance, global box theory does not say anything about the boundary or the place of consciousness. But IIT can say something quantitatively. And I just want to test that account, actually. And this is going to be more convincing evidence for IIT. Because just quantifying integrated information or similar measures as shown in Hakuan's slide, like path lengths or something, and these are just correlate to the level of consciousness. But this split or unified phenomena is really discrete phenomena or phase transition thing, and this can be really critical test, I think.
I never believed that the IIT is the only theory.
Of course, yeah.
The meaning is twofold. One, first meaning is very general thing. I never believe every theory in every field cannot be the only theory because the data is finite difference, but that's such kind of quine during this thesis. But the more meaningful thing is the relating to arrow from phenomenology or philosophy to mathematics.
Yeah.
I believe there is many possibilities from the philosophy to mathematics. Even if you admit the 5 or 4 axioms by IIT, but mathematical representation is very different, has different diversity. For example, the representation by real coordinate x, y, z coordinates, or the frequency p, mu, or something. Also, I think both are very difficult, but logically possible realization. So, in the second meaning, in the constructive way, IIT can search the many versions of things. It is my opinion.
I have a question about Shimuro-sensei's comments. I think the same thing happens in not only in consciousness study but in other scientific studies. For example, in physics, we have Newton's equations or Schrödinger equation. We can predict what the world, how world behave, but we don't know why Schrödinger equation holds. So that's the same as Shimuro-sensei said, I think. So I think what we can do in scientific study is finding one-to-one mapping between equations and phenomenology or some real world, what happened in real world.
Except that in physics, you find a mechanism to account for the phenomenon which is described in the equation. Now, I don't want Oizumi-san to tell me that yes, the IIT predicts that it's partly segregated, partly integrated. Don't tell me that because it's in the axiom. It's just by mathematical definition, tautology, right? So there's a difference there. So physics describes phenomenon by equation. But it does provide, or at least trying to provide, a mechanism explanation.
Right, but there are cases that why matter exists or why mass exists. These kind of things, physics has provided a sort of more refined kind of answer to that. But why part is never.
No, I don't think so, because Y can be divided into 4 different characteristics, such as neural system can be informative, meaning representation. It can be integrated and segregated, and you can divide them into functional characteristics, and you can hit one after another one. So that's in that sense, I like axioms if those are questions. But the way IIT is proposed is not to raise those 4 things, very important, unique characteristics of phenomenology of consciousness as questions. That's my problem.
And maybe just to get the history right about Newton and Schrödinger. So Newton had a lot of hard time, and people gave him a lot of hard time. He was objected. People almost want to oppose to him being the Royal Society's chairman because the Newtonian physics laws are not mechanistic. He actually received a lot of criticism for that, and turned out that people accepted those Newtonian laws as laws of physics because they really work over and over and over again. Unless you go to very small and very large things. And on planet Earth, basically, it just always worked, and people grudgingly let him get away with it. And then in Schrödinger's case, of course, in the early days of quantum mechanics, even Einstein famously said, "I just don't believe that God would play dice with us." There was a lot of criticism those guys had to shout, have to tough out and received, and ultimately CD players were built, and then it turns out that these experiments are repeated over and over again with high precision. So people said, okay, grudgingly, fluidity, let these be our laws. So if you really want to go that route, you have to be prepared to go through the same kind of very harsh process to make these laws.
Yeah, I totally agree, and to be objective, I really think that what Crystal said is mostly wrong. as a student. But on the other hand, he's kind of doing wrestling, right? Pro wrestling, hey, come on, this is the best theory, you can beat us, and then that will elicit sort of the challenge from other theories. Not really, just criticizing that's not going to work, but we want to invite other type of theories, a prediction that can compete with IIT. And then if IIT makes a wrong prediction and the other one makes a correct prediction, then I'm totally happy to crush the IIT. And the way IIT works is that first if we start with this action, we predict this, and if the prediction is wrong, then we completely discard this version of the theory. So I think that's one way of doing kind of science or in modern physics. Starting from action. Let's assume that this could be the state of the world, and if that's inconsistent with the world, then some of the assumptions in our actions or translation was wrong. That's the kind of approach.
In principle, I agree.
Except that I want you to tell me, starting from those four axioms, what questions you want to answer with IIT?
If those four
Questions are not the questions to answer.
Yeah, so that's there are several experiments we are thinking, but one example would be like monkey version of the split brain experiment, where we gradually cool down the corpus callosum, and then at the time when the major IIT integrated information splits into two locals, then maybe left hand and right hand starts to become independently reporting some different aspects of consciousness or something like that. That's the kind of question or prediction we want to test.
I'll stop here.
Yeah.
Just on the physics thing, I think the main difference between something like the Schrödinger equation and something like IIT is, again, the Schrödinger equation is a forward model. So you can't predict the Schrödinger equation from Schrödinger equation, but you can apply the Schrödinger equation times 10 to the 9 or 10 to the 20 or however many iterations and get something which you couldn't just look at the Schrödinger equation and say, oh, I can put this in. So you can use the Schrödinger equation to ask questions like, is water wet? Or is there such a thing as water? And I think the question, given the way that IIT is structured, what are the kinds of ways that it can be used as a forward model so that you can actually find implications that are very far away from what people already have in mind when they're writing down those axioms? I think that's the challenge.
In some way, that's what Scott Aronson already did.
Yeah.
So try to find a counterintuitive thing depends on serendipity. So it's kind of slightly difficult. But coming to what Oizumi-san said about the global workspace theory, and you said that they don't have a specific math. But math is basically just simple description of something in a different way, or maybe more in a precise way. And if someone is, if the field doesn't really care about IIT, and if the IIT wants to jump into the criticism, then I think the IIT people should try to describe the global workspace theory or whatever into some kind of precise manner. Yeah. Then try to compare it. Otherwise, you can't wait them to make a description, right?
Yeah,
So,
I'm thinking about this actually. Yeah. So their assumption is that some kind of global availability of information is kind of key for generating consciousness. So information is kind of broadcast, over the entire brain or something like this. So this kind of thing probably can be formulated with, for instance, information theory or something. And yeah, but again, about the locus of consciousness and where the consciousness arises, thus global works theory does not have any principle for that, how we can make the boundary in some given system. IIT is unique in that sense.
yeah, I agree. I'm trying to be just a bit constructive, as Hakon said. So contrasting a couple of theories is always important to show people that this is better or not.
Yeah.
So maybe you should actively attack to other theories and describe it in some manner and then try to say this is better or not, right?
Yeah.
So,
maybe this is minor point, but in a global works theory, that the information is somehow believed to be transmitted by spikes. So the spikes are important, so the actual firing. But in IIT, the silence of neurons are, again, information, much information. For instance, the total silence of the entire brain actually generates really lot of information. But in global workspace theory, if there is nothing, there is no consciousness. But IIT is sort of against that. So this is probably different predictions.
maybe counterintuitive something,
Exactly.
maybe lying somewhere around there.
Yeah, counterintuitive prediction by IIT.
Maybe let's stop here because we are a bit running late. And also, Hygro's comment on comparison with other theory, which was mostly sort of the theme of this, debate, is now carried into the next, theory, which is predictive coding theory. So let's reconvene. Maybe
Just a short comment.
Yes, okay.
Just a short
Yeah.
comment. I think the terminology of axiom is very frustrating. Because in modern mathematics, axiom is a working hypothesis, not such kind of the truth or something. And also, more importantly, axiom must imply some theorems. That is, in IIT theory, so-called postulates can imply the proposition or theorem, but axiom does not directly imply. So this kind of thing, maybe.
How should we call that? Like, the axioms are basically the essential properties of consciousness.
Or the observation. Or fundamental observation or something. Such a separation terminology.
I think Nichols said desiderata or something. I find that much better. That's what you want from your theory. It's not. That's not the. I also find this extremely frustrating.
But even in Euclid's notion of axioms, the axioms is working hypothesis, not such kind of.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I always think what you should call axioms is the thing. Basically, that it's only when you get to math. Like your axioms are just natural language, vague expressions, and like I don't understand why you want to call this axioms. I think that sounds better.
Yeah. Sometimes when I explain it, it's I just call it as a phenomenological property or essential property of consciousness. Or so the way you describe like desiderata or required property may be more natural thing, and then calling the postulate as an axiom may be more fitting to the mathematical. Okay. And then that makes you probably happier. Okay, so now we are happier. Let's take a break.